All right, guys, we got another great portrait here that I'm going to show you how to really spice up using some of the color methods that we've been learning. So let's go ahead and get started. Right off the bat, I think this photo is a little bit flat, so we're going to add a little bit of contrast. So to do that, let's go ahead and use a curves adjustment layer. So the first thing I want to do is make our darks a little more black. So I can do that by grabbing the black point down here and just pulling that a little bit closer towards our histogram. See, that's really making that hair contrast stand out. And then I might just brighten some of these highlights up a little bit by pulling up on the curve, maybe somewhere around here. Something like that. So let's look at a before and after real quick. So just adding a little bit of contrast. Here's before, here's after. Really makes that image pop. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I kind of want to play with the color balance of this and shift some of the tones. So let's go ahead and create a color balance layer. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add some warmth. So I'm going to go to the shadows. I'm going to make those a little more red. So I'm just going to bump that up to about a +5. And what we're doing here is we're kind of toning the hair. So even though the hair was a little bit more of a brownish color, we're going to push that a little bit more towards a reddish golden color here. Now, the next thing I want to do is also warm up the skin tone. So I'm going to go to highlights and I'm going to push some yellow into there. So I'm going to bring this down to maybe -11, something like that. Now keep in mind that, as we stack adjustment layers, colors start to change a little bit, so we can always come back and fine tune this a little bit more if we're not liking it after we add some of these other layers. But so far, I'm thinking that looks good. Let's look at before and after. So before and after. Now it's a little bit too warm on the background, but we're gonna address that just a little bit. Also, the next thing I'm noticing is the shadows are maybe a little bit too warm. So I like that we made them darker and kind of toned some of the hair in here, but I want these blacks to be a little bit more neutral. And you can see that if we zoom in on the eyes here, even like the black shadows here is looking a little red. So I'm going to create a selective color adjustment layer. I'm going to drop down to my blacks and I'm just going to cool those a little bit. So I'm going to maybe add like 1 or 2 points of black. And then I'm going to add some cyan to kind of balance the magenta tone or the red tone because cyan and red are opposites. So if I add a little cyan in there, you can see, just about 5 points really brought those blacks back to neutral. So let's look at before. See how it's all magenta red in these shadows? Just by adding a few points of cyan, a couple points of black, brought it right back to neutral and keeps our contrast looking normal and natural. Okay, so let's go ahead and zoom out. All right. So I'm really liking how this is looking so far. So the next thing I want to do is I kind of want to tone the background to complement the warmth of the skin tones and the hair. So if you think about color opposites, they complement each other. So if we're going towards red, yellow, kind of orangish on the skin and the hair, we want to go towards like a teal cyan in the background. So what I'm going to do to get that taken care of is another selective color adjustment layer. So let's go ahead and click another one of those, and I'm going to drop down to the neutrals this time. And what I want to do is make them a little more cyan. So let's bump a few points of cyan in there. That's really making this pop a little bit more. And we can also take some magenta and yellow out. So maybe take about 5 points out, and we'll take not black. Undo that, take a little bit of yellow out, maybe about 15 points. Now I'm really liking how this is turning out. It's much more of a blue cyan color. So let's see what that looks like. Now, right now we're just looking at the background. Obviously it's affecting the face and the hair and everything, but we just want to look at the background. So far that is looking pretty good. So I'm going to hit OK. And then what I'm going to do is I've already got my layer mask selected right here. So I'm going to grab my brush tool on black. So we're going to be hiding this adjustment layer. And I'm just going to start to paint over the areas where I don't want this selective color adjustment to hit. So if we turn that off, I really like the skin tones here on the face and the hair, but I want it to affect the background. So if we turn that back on, grab my brush tool, about 100%, and let's see, we want a nice soft brush. We're just gonna start painting where we don't want that to hit. So I'm gonna get the skin and the hair around here. Get this hair. Really want that nice warm glow on the hair from the sun. All right, so that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna shrink my, grab my brush. I'm gonna shrink my brush down a little bit. I'm gonna paint in over the hand here. And because we have such a soft brush, we don't have to be super accurate, but we want to be as good as we can. So paint some of this back in, get some of this finer detail back here. I'm just using the bracket keys on my keyboard to adjust my brush size. Okay, so that's looking really good. So let's turn that on and off. We can see now basically all we've done is tone down the warmth from the background. So we've really taken a lot of those reds and yellows out and made it more of a blue teal, which is a nice contrast to the orange in the skin and hair. Okay, so I mean that's already looking great. Let's look at a before and after. So if we just option click on our background layer, so there's what we started with, and here's what we got so far. So a lot of nice contrast, really warmed up the skin tones, made those blacks pop, and cooled down the background. So this is looking great. So the next thing I want to do is I really kind of want to play with the glow in the hair here and maybe add some sun light spilling in from the background. So what I want to do with that is I want to try adding a color fill layer, and we can do that by going up to layer and new fill layer and solid color. Just hit OK. So it created a new layer over here, and now we can pick a color. So I'm thinking something nice and warm, kind of a golden glow like the sun. So something like that, maybe, yeah, something right around there. And we can always come back in and change this color if we want to later. So go ahead and hit OK. And what I'm going to do now is change the layer blend mode to soft light. So what that's doing is kind of just blending it in and allowing the texture from the image to fall through. So I'm going to drop down this opacity quite a bit. So I'm thinking maybe 30, 40%. Let's go with that right now. So I want this to kind of be the sunlight as if it was coming in from over here. So if that were true, it would be spilling onto the subject here and then kind of fading as it went over to this side over here. So I'm going to click on my layer mask and I'm going to mask out the left side of the image here and all of this background on the left side. So let's grab our brush tool on black here and just leave it on normal. And let's do 40%. And you can just hit 4 on your keyboard to get your opacity to 40%. So make sure, make sure you have black, and then make sure your brush is nice and soft, 0% hardness. So I'm just going to start to paint this. Make sure you have black. Hello. Okay, so I'm going to start to paint this out over here. And I'm even going to paint it out a little bit where it's hitting right now to tone it down a little bit because we're just on 40%. But I'm going to start with painting out kind of across the face, something like that. And then I'm going to go to 100% and really paint it out of all this background area. Okay, maybe even a little bit down here. Not quite so much there. So now I'm going to bring it to about 30% and paint out a little bit more over here. I'm going to paint out a little bit of this. It's a little too much down here. So I just undid that a little bit. Now, I like where it's hitting right now. I like our mask, but I feel like it's a little bit too intense still. So I'm just going to tone down the opacity a little bit more, maybe like 35%. And I think that's looking pretty good. So we turn this on and off. So there's before and there's after. So that really gives us a nice glow on the skin a little bit where we didn't paint it out 100%. And then especially on the hair, it really looks like the sun is hitting the hair here, making it light up and glow. And that looks pretty great. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add a little bit more of a sunlight glow or a little flare over here. So to do that, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to grab my brush tool. And again, I'm going to add, I'm going to pick like a nice warm color, very similar to the one we just picked. And I'm just going to paint. So I'm going to put my opacity at 100% so we can tone it down after. But I'm just going to paint a nice soft glow over here, kind of replicating what we just did, but this is going to be a little bit brighter. So next I'm going to drop my layer blend mode down to overlay. And then I'm going to play with this opacity again. So I'm just going to drop this way low. And so all we're doing right now is adding a little bit more of the sun glow. So tone that down a little bit, and then we can add a layer mask again. Grab our brush tool and kind of clean it up a little bit. I don't want it to spill so much onto the face here, even so much onto the hair. What I'm focusing on is having it glow here in the background. So that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna erase, I'm gonna drop my opacity down to about 40%. I'm gonna erase some of this just a little bit, or mask it out. Okay, so right now it's just creating basically a warm glow in the upper right hand corner there. So that's looking pretty good. Now to make it look like the sun, we need to add more of a white glow because the sun would really be too bright to register all that color. So we're just gonna create another layer. Grab our brush tool, hit D on your keyboard to get your default colors, and then X to make white foreground. We're going to do the same thing we just did, but with white. So I'm going to add a nice white glow. Oh, let's bring our opacity up and our flow up because we're going to fade this. So I'm just going to paint a nice bright white glow from that corner. And then we're just going to drop the opacity down on this. And you know what? I kind of like it bright up in this corner. We want it to really hide some of this horizon line back here. So that's looking pretty good, but now we're gonna mask it. So we're gonna create a layer mask on this layer as well. Grab our brush tool with black selected so we can hide. And then we're just gonna start to mask this out. Now I might drop this down to about 40% and just kind of start to paint some of this away. And now you can paint most of it away down here. This is really, again, for that corner. So something like this. Now that looks pretty good. Let's look at before and after that top layer. So really, we're just blowing out that corner by making it white. And that's looking pretty good. I might put some more of it back over this green area. So if we switch to white and shrink our brush size a little bit, so we're going to reveal a little bit more of this glow right over here. Something like that. So there we go. Now that looks looking pretty good for our sunlight. So let's go ahead and group this top two layers. So if we shift click on both of those and then Command G, put them in a group. So there's before our sun glow, and here's after. Now if you're putting this up, now if you're turning this on and off and you're thinking, I like that a little bit before, maybe I could tone that down a little bit. On top of this whole group, we can drop the opacity, and that's going to affect both of those layers evenly. So you can play with that and kind of get it to a spot you really like, maybe even 50% of what we had it. So before, after. So I think that's looking pretty good. I might bump it up a little bit. I kind of like that bright glow, and that really plays into the bright glow we have on the hair here. All right, so I think that's looking pretty good. Let's look at before and after our whole image. So if we option click on our background layer, we'll turn on, we'll solo just the background layer. So there's before, And then if we keep holding Option and click on this again, there's after. So you can see that really took this image from, a pretty good portrait and really turned it into something that's professional looking. It looks like a high-end retouching, color correcting job. So utilizing those layers that we just learned about can really help your image pop. So let's just do a quick review of what we did. So we added a curves layer to give it a little bit of punch, a little contrast kick. So we darken those blacks and pop those highlights a little bit. Then we added a color balance layer, and we really warmed up the shadows and the highlights. We made that skin tone look a little more warm and glowing. Next, we added a selective color layer to bring our blacks back to neutral. So if you look here in the shadow on the hair and then the shadows in the eyes, you can really see how that made them a little more neutral. So here's before, they're nice and warm, a little too warm actually. So we added that cyan to those blacks to really give that some contrast. Okay, next we added a selective color layer to complement our skin and hair. So because our skin and hair is orange, we did a selective color adjustment layer where we put some cyans into the neutrals. We took some yellow and some magenta out, really made that a nice teal blue color to complement the skin and hair. Next, we added a color fill layer to really make that skin and hair pop with warmth. Now that might be a little bit too much, so as we're coming back in here, we could just tone this down just a tad, maybe bring that to 24%, 25%. I think that looks a little bit better, not quite so saturated and hot. And then finally, we added 2 adjustments to make a sun glow back here. So we added just a color brush layer on overlay mode, and we added just a white brush layer that we changed the opacity on above that to replicate the sun. So there you have it. That is a pretty good retouching job utilizing some of the best tools Photoshop has to modify the color in your image. And I think that is a significant change. And all your photos are going to like it. So go ahead and try this technique on your own, tweak it, adjust it. Maybe you don't want to do something warm, but you want to do a cool glow. Show me some of your results and let me know what you think about this technique.